Okay, let's do some practice of Pythagorean theorem. So we're asked to find side length x here. And if you want, sometimes it can be helpful to label these as a, b, c. So remember, c is always the hypotenuse. And so we know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So in this example, then 16 squared plus 10 squared equals our x squared. Okay, and so now I'm going to calculate on my calculator. 16 squared plus 10 squared gives me 356, and that's equal to x squared. So now I know what x squared is. I want to know what a single plane x is, so I'm going to square root both sides. And on your calculator, most of you, it will vary depending on your calculator, but like right now mine has the 356 still in it for my previous answer. I can hit square root and then my answer button, which on my calculator is alpha equals, but will depend on your calculator, and then press equals so that it takes the square root of the previous answer I had in my calculator. And if I do that, it's asked us to round to one decimal place. So if I round, I've got 18.8679, blah, blah, blah. So I would have x is 18.9. And there's no units, so we just leave it as 18.9. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's again label this ABC. Remember, C has to be the hypotenuse. So we know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 8.4 squared plus x squared equals 35 squared. So I'm going to subtract, I mean, you could calculate out 8.4 squared first. Maybe, should we do that? Let's do that. So 8.4 squared gives me 70.56. And 35 squared gives me 1,225. So I'm trying to isolate my x. So I'm going to subtract 70.56 from both sides, or 70 and 56 hundredths, as I should say. And if I do that then, so now I've got x squared equals 1,225 minus 70.56 gives me 1,154.44. And then I'm going to square root both sides. Don't forget that step. And we get x equals, so on my calculator, I can do square root of the answer equals, and rounded to the nearest tenth or one decimal place, I get 34.0 because it's like 33.977. And again, there's no units to worry about, so we just leave it unitless. Okay, next one. So again, we can label this ABC. It doesn't matter which one you label A and which one you label B. We know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 12.2 squared. Well, maybe I'm just going to do this one kind of the way they show you, actually. Because they show you to rearrange first. It doesn't really matter which way you do it, but we're trying to find b. So let's subtract a squared from both sides. So we get b squared equals c squared minus a squared. You can always do this step after you put in the numbers too, which is what I did on the earlier example. But let's do it this way too, just so you have both in your tool belt. So b squared then is going to be c squared, which is 17.3 squared, minus a squared, which is 12.2 squared. And so b squared equals, let's calculate that out. I get 150.45. And then we're going to take the square root of both sides. And when we do that, we get to the nearest tenth, 12.3. Okay, next one does not look like a right angle at all, but we have the symbol there, so It is 1. It's just a bit distorted in the picture. So I'm going to label this ABC with C as my hypotenuse. And as always, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Here we're solving for our hypotenuse, so it's already arranged the way we want. So 60 squared plus 44 squared is going to equal our x squared. So if I calculate that, 60 squared plus 44 squared, I get 5,536. And then I want to solve for x, so I'm going to square root both sides. And round to the nearest tenth to get 74.4. And hopefully you see how useful these calculations could be. For example, when you're calculating lengths of roof trusses or excavating and want to make sure your corners are square. My dad used to use these all the time when he was building houses. Okay, so let's continue on. So ABC, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So 15 squared plus another 15 squared, oh, there should be a squared on that c, equals c squared. So calculate that out, and we get 450. Okay, and then let's square root both sides, which gives us c equals 21.2. Okay, next one, again, we're going to label ABC with c as our hypotenuse. And so a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're looking for our a, so I'm going to start by subtracting b squared from both sides. So a squared equals c squared minus b squared. If you want, you can add this formula to your formula sheet too, if that's helpful. And so that means my a is x, so x squared equals 1.2 squared minus 0.4 squared, which is 1.28. And so I'm going to square root both sides. And what do we get? 1.1. And another way to kind of double check as you're doing these, check to make sure if that makes sense. We know that our hypotenuse must be the longest side. It's 1.2. So it makes sense we found a leg of the triangle to be 1.1. We know from the picture too, it looks like it's going to be a longer side. So that makes sense. But if we had an answer like 5, we know we did something wrong. Okay, next one here is a little bit, actually it's not that much trickier. It's just we have to think about, we really only have to consider this one right triangle over here. We can kind of just ignore this part of the picture right now. Okay, so we're trying to find x. So we've got an a, b, c. So a squared, oh dear. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're trying to solve for a, so I'm going to subtract b squared from both sides. So I get a squared equals c squared minus b squared, which is 19 squared minus, oh dear, I was supposed to be solving for b. Whoops. Okay, let's go back. We're going to solve for a, no, we're going to solve for b, which means we have to subtract a squared from both sides. So we get b squared is c squared minus a squared. So, and b is x. So x squared is 19 squared minus 13.7 squared, which gives us 173.31. Try not to round this number, by the way, because you're using it in downstream calculations, so it's good to leave that number full, all the decimal places. Let's square root both sides. That's also an advantage of using the answer button, because I can just go square root of the answer, and it's going to keep all those decimal places in there for me. And then when I round to the nearest tenth, I've got like 13.164, so I would get 13.2. And again, if you look at the picture, that makes sense. That's less than our hypotenuse, and side A and B look pretty similar too, although not all your triangles will be drawn completely to scale. Okay, let's look at this next one now. So this is showing this 5.2 is like this side here is 5.2. And we know that over here we have a right angle. So we can actually infer we have a right angle here because it's a straight line. So it's a straight line. If it's supplementary then to 90 degrees, which means the other angle there must also be a 90 degrees. So, and that means X is my hypotenuse. So I'm going to label this ABC. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And I'm trying to solve for C. So 5.2 squared plus 6.6 squared equals my hypotenuse, which is my x squared. And when I calculate that out, I get 70.6 equals x squared. So now I'm going to square root both sides. And we get x is 8.4.